Hi guys, it's me, Chancellor HD, and welcome to this qualifying preview for the final race weekend before the summer break here at Spa Francorchamps for the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Hope you guys are well. Physically, I'm not in great condition. I do know that in the last, quite a bit, I've had a bit of a cough, on stream, but my cough is a bit worse at the moment, so you might have to just bear with that for today and also my stream on Sunday. So sorry about that if that does make things a bit hard to listen to, but yeah, here we are at the final Grand Prix before the summer break, and there is plenty in this qualifying preview to go through. Of course, as you see with the thumbnail of this stream, Max Verstappen has a penalty for the race this weekend. He will start 10 places back from wherever he finishes in qualifying. So the highest he can start the race on Sunday is 11th on the grid. Of course, we saw a couple years ago him win from, I think, 12th on the grid or something like that in an incredible drive from Max Verstappen, but that's going to be quite a bit harder this weekend to pull off. But it does definitely make things interesting, Max having that penalty, not just for the race weekend, but also for the championship as well. And we will get into the championship standings in a moment. And, look at those standings after, obviously, what happened in Hungary. But, there is other stuff, obviously, to get into as well. Obviously, we've had some running today, dry running at the Spa track. So we'll get into all of the data from Friday practice too, looking at who finished where, going through the sector time data, also looking at upgrades as well. There has been a couple important upgrades for a couple teams, and just looking at how things are shaping up so far this weekend. We'll also get into a couple bits of news, important news. One of those bits of news is to do with Alpine and their team principal, and the other bit of news is to do with an FIA technical directive that may prove important for the rest of this season. We'll get into that later on in the stream. But should be a good weekend. Tomorrow looks like it very well could be a wet day at Spa, so we could get definitely a wet qualifying, maybe a wet/dry qualifying. The race, though, on Sunday looks like we're probably heading for a dry race on Sunday. So very much what we saw today matters towards Sunday, and I think does still matter towards Saturday as well, because as we know at Spa, you don't know if it's going to rain or not. It could be dry, could be wet. So, what happened today in the dry is still important data for the teams and for everyone going forward. But hope you guys are doing well. Obviously, we had a Grand Prix last week in Hungary. And sad that the summer break is already here after what's been some brilliant racing in the last few weeks. Really, since that Monaco Grand Prix, we've had some great races, great racing. Shame the summer break is here. But of course, plenty of races to come after the summer break, which I'll be covering, obviously, after the summer break. So, but hope you guys are doing well, no matter what time zone you're in, what part of the world you're from. And I hope you're all, as excited as I am for what should be a pretty decent, in terms of entertainment, Belgian Grand Prix weekend. And there is, of course, a poll, as usual, running at the top of the live chat. And I've asked you guys who will start the Belgian Grand Prix on Sunday on pole position. And remember, Max Verstappen, the reason he's not included in this poll is because, of course, he can't start on pole. He has a penalty. So your options in the poll are Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc, and Lewis Hamilton. So out of those four drivers, who do you think the most likely driver is to start Sunday's race on pole? And at the end of the stream, we'll get to the results of that and see who you think will take pole position tomorrow. But before we get into things, just a quick reminder of the schedule here on the channel. So, of course, tomorrow, as I said a few days ago, I will not be doing a qualifying watch along because I will be doing a race watch along on Sunday. And again, reminder of the times, I'll be live on Sunday at 12 p.m. UK time, 2 hours before the race begins. For a build up to the race, then the watch along. I will also be joined by my co-commentator Niblo for the first time in months for the Belgian Grand Prix. And then, obviously, the day after the Belgian Grand Prix, there'll be a podcast covering the events at Spa. But I think let's just get into things and start with the championship standings. Because with Max Verstappen taking his grid penalty, gets even more interesting now. So Max Verstappen is how many points clear of Lando Norris? I think 76 points clear now of Lando Norris. So, I mean, Max still has a pretty comfortable gap. But, of course, there is still plenty of races to go. And if that gap does keep, coming down 5 to 10 points every Grand Prix, then Max is going to get even more agitated and panicky if, McLaren keep up their form. Lando Norris, though, still, I think, yet to really take advantage this season of the current struggles I think that Red Bull and Max Verstappen are having. Lando, of course, has a race win this year, one in Miami, but since then, there's been plenty of races I think Lando could have probably won and really took a good amount of points out of Max's championship lead, but hasn't quite done so at quite a few races this year. But still, 76 points behind, it's not impossible, but I think most likely Max Verstappen is going to win the championship. I still think Red Bull have got a good enough car to get it done. And of course, Max Verstappen, good enough driver to get it done. Charles Leclerc then in third. Of course, he's over 100 points behind now. He's not in the championship fight. I think he'll be happy to secure third in the championship for this season. Carlos Sainz fourth. Oscar Piastri fifth. Only, 13 points behind Leclerc in third. And if Piastri can have another strong race this weekend, Oscar might finish the first 14 races of the season in third in the championship and going to the summer break third in the championship, which would definitely be a fantastic first half of the season for him. Lewis Hamilton up to sixth, only 1 point clear of Sergio Perez. That position, though, does kind of make Hamilton's season look a bit better than it's actually been. Because, I mean, even though he has clearly been better than Sergio Perez this season, George Russell, his teammate, who is 9 points behind, has been definitely the better of the two Mercedes drivers this year. So, I think Hamilton's position is slightly false in the driver's standings. And then, you got Perez 7th, Russell 8th, Alonso 9th, still stuck on 45 points, and Lance Stroll in P10. Hulkenberg and Tsunoda are 11th and 12th and are only a couple points behind Lance Stroll. As, of course, Aston Martin continuing to struggle. And then on the constructors' end, Red Bull are now 51 points clear of McLaren. And McLaren, maybe they can't win the Drivers' Championship, but I think at this point they can certainly win the Constructors' Championship, especially with Sergio Perez just not performing in the second Red Bull, which is probably why Red Bull are going to throw Perez out of that car and probably put Daniel Ricciardo in that car for the second half of the season. But McLaren getting closer, and with Max's penalty this weekend, McLaren could probably be 20 points closer going into the summer break. So we'll see how McLaren do. Ferrari, also not a million miles behind for Red Bull. They're only, 67 points behind, which is pretty good considering how poor Ferrari have been in the last few races. So Ferrari still, I think, doing well on the constructors' end, despite their lack of performance. Mercedes, now about 80 points behind Ferrari. Mercedes still think they can catch and pass Ferrari in the championship. We'll see if that's possible. Aston Martin are in 5th, 36 points clear of Racing Bulls, who outscored them in Hungary. Haas in 7th, still a few points behind Racing Bulls. Alpine in 8th on 9 points. Williams 9th on 4 points. And Sauber, of course, last on 0 points. With Max Verstappen, by the way, I forgot to mention that the reason for his 10th-place grid penalty, it is for a new engine component, a new ICE. That's why he has to take a 10-place grid penalty this weekend. It's been coming. He had a couple reliability issues with his car a few races ago, which sadly made taking a penalty here at Spa inevitable for Max Verstappen. But let's get into the results of practice 2. And it wasn't massively surprising, necessarily, but still interesting nonetheless. Lando Norris ended up quickest by a couple tenths of a second over Oscar Piastri. Good lap from Lando. Did do his lap a few minutes after Oscar did, though, so I think Oscar could probably get closer to Lando on lap time there. But encouraging, I still think, is Max Verstappen's pace in the Red Bull for, any Red Bull and Verstappen fans, because even though he will have to take that 10-place drop, it does seem that Red Bull, maybe in clear air, they're not the fastest team, but they are, only marginally slower than McLaren. We're talking maybe a tenth of a second at most. So they're not losing a ton of lap time, are Red Bull and Verstappen. But I think, it is sad that Max does have that penalty, because I think we would have a really great three-way fight for pole position tomorrow if Max did not have that penalty. But really, looking at the pace here and looking, how far Leclerc and the Ferrari is off of the top 3 and how far Mercedes are off, really, the battle is between the two McLarens as to who is going to be on pole. But I think very likely, whether it's wet or dry, McLaren are going to probably be locking out the front row at Spa for Sunday. Again, as to who or what driver it is that is, starting on pole position, we'll have to see. Obviously, last year, I think it was Oscar Piastri who ended up ahead of Lando Norris. Norris, though, I think did have issues with his car. So, if I remember correctly, I think he had issues with his car, like a chassis issue or something like that. So, that may explain why Norris ended up like that last year. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting nonetheless to see how it ends up between McLaren. Red Bull, though, still quick. And then you've got Charles Leclerc in 4th place. Ferrari, their pace looking good, but not... Well, when I say good, I would say better than expected with Ferrari in terms of their pace. I didn't expect them to be this far clear of Mercedes after, Friday practice. So, that looks good for them. And I'm happy for them that they're looking better on that end. But, they are still miles behind McLaren and Red Bull in the parts of the track here at Spa where it really matters. But, pace from Leclerc still looks good. Carlos Sainz then in P5. Not great lap time from him, considering he's quarter of a second away from his teammate. But, nothing that he can't fix. For tomorrow, George Russell then in 6th place for Mercedes. Not a great day for Mercedes. I'm not sure if they weren't very quick today because they were just sandbagging a bit, which, is something they do tend to do, Mercedes, a bit more than other teams on a Friday. We've seen that before. But also, as I'll get onto later, Mercedes have brought an upgrade for this weekend's race. So maybe just doing a bit more testing with that upgrade than, trying to work on their qualifying speed or anything like that. Alpine looking pretty good out of nowhere. They've also brought an upgrade for this Grand Prix, which is good, even though the news surrounding them at the moment is not the greatest. Haas in 8th with Kevin Magnussen. Good to see. Haas, unsurprisingly quick here at Spa. Sergio Perez in 9th. And then Lewis Hamilton in P10. Hamilton didn't do a proper quicker run towards the, say, midpoint of the session. So Lewis Hamilton definitely could have gone a bit quicker in the Mercedes there. But as to where he would have gone, I don't know exactly, but I'd say at the moment, in the dry, Ferrari probably ahead of Mercedes on pure qualifying pace. But again, whether it will be dry through qualifying tomorrow or any parts of qualifying tomorrow, we'll have to see. But yeah, in the dry, looks like it's McLaren and Red Bull on, I'd say, the same pace, really. I know, Lando 2/10 ahead of Oscar and Max, but we also do know that Red Bull sandbag a bit on a Friday compared to teams like McLaren. So, yeah, I think in clean air, in qualifying trim, McLaren and Red Bull on, same pace. Then you've probably got Ferrari in 3rd, Mercedes 4th. Then after that, it's looking pretty competitive in the midfield. If we go on to the rest of the field here. Lance Stroll in 11th, Fernando Alonso in P12, Bottas 13th, Ricciardo 14th, Gasly 15th, and then Hulkenberg, Albon, Sargent, Zhou, and Tsunoda. Yuki Tsunoda also has a grid penalty, I think, for a completely new power unit. So Tsunoda, I think, will be starting at the very back. He has a 60-place grid penalty is the official amount of places on the grid, which is obviously ridiculous. But Aston Martin, not great, but not terrible, considering where they've been in the last few races. Sauber, okay. Racing Bulls, not very good with Ricciardo. We'll get on to, though, why that might be in a moment, because I think that is probably setup related with Racing Bulls. Gasly, bit further down, bit surprising. Also a bit surprising that Hulkenberg is quite far down. Williams, not very competitive either, which is a bit surprising. But yeah, midfield looks nice and competitive. But let's go into that sector time data. Now, the first sector from practice 2, kind of like the third sector as well, it's not really that important. All that's important is that you don't make any major errors in the first or final sector. Going too deep, locking a brake, anything like that. As long as you do a good, if not respectable, sector time, then that's fine. Whoever is quickest in the first or final sector doesn't necessarily or really mean you're going to have the best car. Obviously, the first sector is all about power. You only slow down for turn 1. And then, obviously, you are flat out from turn 1, La Source, all the way up until Les Combes. And, yeah, Tsunoda top on the Racing Bulls. Of course, Tsunoda working on the race setup there. He will probably appear in qualifying, maybe to give his teammate a tow at times, but Tsunoda is, just working on the setup there for the race, obviously given his grid penalty. Alpine, then you got second, and the Ferrari, Aston Martin, Haas, McLaren, Sauber, Red Bull, Williams, and Mercedes. I think you could maybe say with this Sector 1 time, though, that this is evidence that Red Bull and Mercedes probably weren't pushing as hard as other teams, because as you can see, 8th and 10th worst team, or the 8th and 10th best team, rather, in the first sector, which is obviously not where we expect them to be. But the middle sector, really, is the part of the track that decides not only how well you do in qualifying, but it really showcases who has a good car and who does not. Sorry for the cough there. And you can see McLaren, and not only McLaren, but Red Bull as well, comfortably clear of the other cars, Ferrari and Mercedes. Very good pace from the McLaren in the middle sector. Red Bull only a tenth of a second back, and then Ferrari 3.5 tenths back on McLaren in the middle sector, which is really the difference between McLaren and Ferrari at the moment in Formula One. It is, it's all about the cornering when it comes to, the performance difference between McLaren and Ferrari. What is a bit surprising is Mercedes being as far off as they are, 6 tenths of a second slower than McLaren. Even if they are sandbagging a bit with engine power, that is quite alarming to be that far back. So I don't know if, maybe they got the setup wrong. Maybe this technical directive has affected them. We'll get into that later. But yeah, that is a worrying middle sector time from the Mercedes team. And then you've got Aston Martin in 5th, a second away from McLaren. Just incredible how far they are off the pace of the very front-running teams. And then you got Haas, pretty decent pace through the middle sector, I'd say. Alpine 7th, Sauber 8th, Williams 9th. Racing Bulls, though, in 10th. Now, obviously, Yuki Tsunoda was top of the Sector 1 times, but if you look through the entire timing for Sector 1 in Practice 2, Daniel Ricciardo, for all 20 drivers, Daniel Ricciardo was in 3rd place, so it wasn't just Tsunoda who had a very good top speed. So my thinking, when it comes to today, is the reason Racing Bulls are so slow in the middle sector is because they were running quite low on downforce, which may, it may help them a bit in the race if, some other teams go for a bit too much downforce for qualifying to help them with the rain that's probably going to hit the track tomorrow. But, this might just affect them a little too much if they, do run with too little wing, do the Racing Bulls team. So, that's something to keep our eyes on with them, and we'll see if they can improve on that setup. And then the final sector, McLaren, Red Bull at the top, along with Alpine and Haas. And the final sector, like I said, with the first sector, it's not really, it's more important than the first sector, but as long as in the final sector, as long as you get that final chicane right, it doesn't really matter, what else happens in the final sector. Just get the final chicane right, and there's your lap. The pace in this final sector in terms of, from the top team to the bottom team, it doesn't really matter that much. But you got McLaren, Red Bull, Alpine, Haas, Sauber, Williams, Aston Martin, Racing Bulls, and then Ferrari and Mercedes at the bottom, which of course they'll hope not to be that bad in the final sector tomorrow. But with the middle sector, like I said, this is probably the best indication as to the performance difference between the teams in the dry, for this Grand Prix. And McLaren and Red Bull on similar pace, and then Ferrari 3rd. Mercedes, I would still expect to improve, but maybe Ferrari are just a slight bit quicker in the dry this weekend. We'll have to see how that plays out. And then you got Aston Martin, Haas, Alpine, Sauber, Williams, Racing Bulls. So that is really the key sector at this circuit. But let's go back to the top 10. A second covering the top 6. As usual here at Spa, you have big gaps because it is the longest track on the calendar. But given what I think the pecking order is in the dry, I have gone for my qualifying prediction. But of course, this qualifying prediction is based on if it is a dry session. So, if we do get a dry session tomorrow, great. But, we'll have to actually find out if we do get it. But, yeah, let me get on to my top 10 prediction. And I have included Max Verstappen, of course, in the top 10. Because, of course, he will try to qualify first if he can, to try and get the highest possible grid position with his 10th-place penalty. So here's my prediction. I think Max Verstappen only just will take pole ahead of, or not take pole, but finish first ahead of the two McLarens. But of course, Max will take his penalty, meaning that it will be, in my view, Piastri starting on pole just ahead of Lando Norris in the McLaren. And then I think it'll be Charles Leclerc quite far back on lap time, 0.7 of a second, I think it'll be, compared to Max and Piastri and Norris. So Leclerc will end up starting the race for Sunday third. George Russell, I think, will be fifth in qualifying. Sainz in sixth, Hamilton seventh, Perez eighth, Hulkenberg ninth, Ocon 10th. But of course, they will all push up a position because of Max Verstappen's penalty. And the only, in terms of who will start P10, just ahead of Max Verstappen, and that driver, of course, is someone who will qualify, in my view, in 11th, I think will probably be probably one of the Aston Martin drivers. I'm not sure who, though. But that's what I think will happen in qualifying this weekend at Spa. Make sure to let me know, guys, in the live chat, what are your predictions for qualifying? And, of course, I've got that poll running at the top of the chat. So make sure to vote in that to let me know who you think will start the race on pole, given that, of course, Max Verstappen has his penalty. Let me just mute myself so I can cough again. All right, that should be better. So, yeah, let me know in the chat, in that poll, and also make sure to comment in the live chat as well. But before we go on any further, there is a couple more things that that I want to get into. Let's get into quickly some upgrades, and not a ton of upgrades for the teams this weekend, but still some. Mercedes have got a new floor edge, a slightly new floor edge. It's not a massive difference from what they had before, but it is still a decent-sized upgrade for them. Also, they've got a new diffuser and a new beam wing. So Mercedes hoping around this track that would probably give them probably a third of a second per lap extra compared to what they were getting before. But again, so far, we're not seeing that. For Alpine, new front wing and new mirror. For the front wing, though, it's only just slightly redesigned elements on the front wing, so only a small upgrade there for Alpine. But maybe we're already seeing the signs that it is working, because Ocon, of course, was in the top 10. Haas, new rear wing and new beam wing. Just some reprofiling for them. Of course, they had a big upgrade a few races ago. Also looking very competitive are Haas. And for Sauber, had a massive upgrade last week and some more parts here. New mirror, new floor fence, new front wing and new rear wing. But with the new front wing and rear wing, it is just some slight adjustments. It's nothing massive in difference compared to what they had before. Now, before I come to your comments in the chat, and make sure to keep them coming, by the way, and make sure to smash the like button if you haven't already. Let's try and get up to 15 or 20 plus likes if we can. That'd be great if we could. Yeah, a couple bits of news that I want to get into. So obviously we've got through the Max Verstappen penalty stuff, which I'm sure everyone knows by now. Let's get into a couple more things. And we're going to start at Alpine. Let me just let me just get this up on my end so I can show you guys on screen. I haven't done this in a while. There you go. Think you guys can see this? Yep. So Alpine earlier can confirm that Bruno Famin, who was the team principal, technically still is, will move away from his current role as team principal of the F1 division by the end of August. Bruno will be in charge of all other motorsport activities of the Renault Group at Viry. Not sure how to pronounce it exactly, so I'm not going to. A new team principal will be announced in due course. Alpine, once again, burning their way through another team boss. I think, wasn't it this time last year? They sacked both Otmar Safnauer and their sporting director, Alan Permain. And a year later, they're in, twice as bad situation as they were this time last year, where this time last year there was, disappointment over not quite hitting the targets maybe they had set, pre-season, from last year. And they had started the season well, Alpine, in 2023, but really, fell off. And obviously 2024 has been quite a bit different, where they started off with easily the worst car and have got better. They've had some good races here and there. The drivers have done the best they can. But, what do you call it? Alpine, all in all, they have been shit. They've been absolutely terrible. They are 8th in the championship. They are miles away from Aston Martin, who are 5th in the championship, who really, given how Alpine ended the season last year, where they were regularly in the points, and, Aston Martin have been pretty poor for the last few races, Alpine should be fighting Aston Martin in the championship. 5th place in the championship is there to be won. Aston Martin are not this super strong team, but Alpine are, where they're at. There's also, there was a story a few days ago that Alpine, or Renault rather, the Renault Group, are looking to shut down their Formula One engine division and are looking for a supplier for the Alpine team in 2026. Apparently they've contacted Mercedes, but I don't know if there's been any success with that. We also had rumors a few months ago about them contacting Red Bull for a Red Bull powertrain deal maybe, but I don't think there was any success with that. What an absolute failure this team has been. And not just the team, but the company, Renault, in this V6 hybrid era. Obviously in the V8 era, all great. I mean, they didn't really, the reason they had success in the V8 era was because of Red Bull. It wasn't anything to do with the Renault engine. Red Bull needed an engine, obviously, to have a car, and the Renault is what they had. But if you'd put any other V8 at the time in that Red Bull car, Red Bull still would have won the championship. It wouldn't have made a difference. But yeah, ever since the start of the V6 hybrid era, Renault have been an absolute joke. 2014 and 15 supplied some awful power units to Red Bull and their other customers. Obviously took over the Lotus team in 2016. Became a good midfield outfit, but never pushed on after that. And to become a top team, which is really what they should have become, which is, what they were able to do back in the 2000s and the 80s as well. And they've just been an abject failure. They've spent billions on their Formula One project in the last, 8 years. And all they've got for it is a few podiums and one race win. That is pathetic. It really is. So yeah, we'll see what the next turn will be in the future of the team. But yeah, just another sorry turn, let's say, in that team's history. And wouldn't be surprised if in a few years they ended up, off the grid, Alpine, or, being bought out by another team. Would not be surprised by that whatsoever, because, they, I mean, with what they have, resources and money-wise, obviously they're massively underperforming. And, at this point, given how far into the project they are, there's little point, really, at continuing for them. So, we'll see what happens on that. But there's also some other bit of news, which I want to get into, and I'll get up on screen from Twitter as well. And it is, and this, by the way, just to confirm the sourcing for this is from Albert Fabrega, and this is from this article, Formula.Uno, which I think is a very credible source, talking about a new technical directive which will come into effect from the Belgian Grand Prix this weekend. And it says the FIA aims to monitor and collect data on the rotation and twisting of the front wing at various speeds. FIA insisted all front wings are fully legal based on existing load tests. The purpose of the data collection exercise is to verify whether some teams have figured out how to use secondary parameters such as temperature or, more simply, aerodynamic load to create additional flexibility. And here is an image of the front wing part in question in terms of what they're going to be monitoring. But if we just stay on this for a second, but the reason this technical directive has come about is mainly because Red Bull complained a few races ago about, I think, McLaren, but also mainly Mercedes having a flexible moving front wing. And they believe, Red Bull, that Mercedes, the reason Mercedes have improved with that front wing upgrade they brought a few races ago in Montreal, they believe it's because it's a flexible wing. And that is why this has come about. So it will be very interesting to see, especially with Mercedes. McLaren don't seem to be affected so far. But with Mercedes, who the accusation is more so against, it will be very interesting to see if they go back to where they were before that upgrade. Where before that upgrade, they were miles off the pace of the top three teams and were closer to the midfield, which is how they looked, funnily enough, in practice 2 today. So we will keep our eyes very much on Mercedes, not just for this weekend, but going forward to see whether that has affected them. Because, of course, remember, 2 years ago at the Belgian Grand Prix of 2022, there was a technical directive around the floors, and it was believed that it would affect Red Bull and Ferrari. It ended up not affecting Red Bull and affecting Ferrari. So we might see something of this, maybe this weekend or just moving forward, and it might affect the results moving forward as well. So keep your eyes peeled on the performance of the Mercedes car. That is going to be interesting to see. Because if they do suddenly drop off the pace, then it is clear that Red Bull's accusations had or held some water. But before we go on to anything else in this stream, I am going to come to you guys in the chat, because we've gone through a lot of stuff so far. So, let's see what you guys are having to say. And hello to Efron, by the way. Hope you're all doing well. Hello to Rook, by the way. Good to see you. Crystal Racing says, I'm busy watching you whilst you're watching the Olympic Paris opening ceremony. They've gone flat out to make it the fanciest intro ever. It will never be as good as our opening ceremony with, James Bond and all that. Never be as good, no matter how hard they try. Crystal Racing saying Norris shouldn't have moved over back in Hungary. From a selfish point of view, yeah, probably not, but would he want to risk the destruction of team relations? Because, if he is going to win the Drivers' Championship, he is probably going to need Oscar Piastri to help him down the line. So, yeah, it's an interesting discussion. Also, yeah, news that Crystal Racing is talking about there. Mattia Binotto, is back in Formula One and is back at Audi. I will, though, talk about that more in my podcast because I am going to cover it in my next recording because I've got, I think, a couple questions asking about that, about Audi in general. So I will get into that in my next podcast episode. And also, yeah, just to confirm as well, I think the official confirmation was yesterday. Um, what do you call it? Esteban Ocon has officially signed for the Haas F1 team for 2025 and beyond. So the Haas lineup is now Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman, which is a pretty strong driver lineup. Arguably, the strongest lineup Haas have ever had. So it'd be interesting to see how that works next year. KG Blazes Perez's car sucks. Let me see if I can find some other comments here. Alonso looking very average recently, says Crystal Racing. I might be coping when I say this, but I am maybe deluding myself as well into believing that he's just not happy with the car, is Fernando, and that's why his performance has dropped off. But yeah. Is Alonso tanking on purpose? Asked Crystal Racing. I mean, I think he knows he's going to finish ninth in the championship. So, I don't think he's super bothered about, picking up points. Because, I mean, Aston Martin are going to finish fifth in the championship. Say regards to think Max starts anywhere from 12th to 14th, to be honest. Colo says Lando Norris will crash tomorrow. That's not the type of prediction I want to hear, to be honest. Crystal Racing says Renault had themselves in Red Bull until 2018. That's enough data surely to fix an engine. You'd think. I mean, look at Honda. Once they got away from McLaren, or even not even that. If you look at Honda, I mean, they came in 2015, and by 2019, 4 years later, they had a good competitive power unit. When in 2018, 4 years after Renault's first year in the V6 hybrid era, Renault still had, like zero power compared to, Ferrari and Mercedes. And I mean, Honda, they didn't have, as much power, of course, as that illegal Ferrari engine, but still, it was better than the Renault engine of 2018. But I'll let you guys keep voting in that poll, and I'll just move on to what will I move on to? I think what we'll do is just a quick roundup of the teams going into qualifying tomorrow, and then we'll probably get onto the results of that poll in a moment. So yeah, let's start with the team. So yeah, Red Bull, Max Verstappen, of course, just needs to try and get a minimum top or front row, result, first or second. I think that would probably be good enough for him. And then, if he starts from 11th or 12th, then that's still a good enough position, I think, definitely for him to get onto the podium on Sunday. Probably not win the race, though, unless he, gets a safety car at the right time or a virtual safety car. But it's, with Red Bull, it's a shame, really, because, and well, it's not a shame for any opposing fans, but from Red Bull's perspective, it is a shame because, obviously, last week in Hungary, they were slower than McLaren, that was clear. But I think this weekend, I think I think they're right there on pace with McLaren. They obviously just have the bad luck of having to, take this penalty. So it's, compromising their weekend. But I still think, at the end of it all, we still very much could see Max Verstappen on the podium. Sergio Perez needs to be in the top 10 tomorrow. Cannot afford, I don't care if it's wet, he cannot afford to crash again tomorrow. Because if he does, then, I mean, what can Red Bull do at that point if the guy keeps crashing? So yeah, please, Sergio, qualify in the top 10 at least and don't crash. That would be great if you could do that. But on pace, I think Max will be right there with the McLarens. And like I said, I think Max will actually finish first in qualifying tomorrow. But of course, we'll have to drop to 11th on the grid if that does happen. But here are some stats regarding Red Bull going into qualifying tomorrow. Max, again, has a 10-place grid penalty for this weekend. He has, though, finished first in qualifying at Spa in the last 3 qualifyings at Spa in 2021, 2022 and 2023. 2022, of course, he finished first in qualifying, took a penalty, went back on the grid, and still ended up winning the race. Red Bull have only started on pole at Spa, at Spa twice since 2015. Not a great record. But let's go on to the Scuderia. Looking decent for them. They're not on the same level as Red Bull and McLaren, but of course with Max's penalty does help them a bit with their prospects for tomorrow and this weekend in general. And I think for them to be third best team, I think they're looking likely for it in dry conditions. But if it is wet, I can see Ferrari struggling. Even with the 2 drivers they have, who of course are brilliant drivers in the wet, their car is not a good wet weather car, as we have seen, in the last few races where there has been some rain. It's not been a good car in those conditions. So Ferrari need to pray that it stays dry, at least for Q3, if they're going to get, say, a top 4 grid position, for the race on Sunday, which then gives them a good chance of a podium at Spa. Of course, remember, Ferrari have not had a podium in Formula 1 since, the Austrian Grand Prix. That's the only podium they've had since that win in Monaco. That's how bad they've been as of recent. But here's some stats with Ferrari. Their last pole position at Spa was Carlos Sainz in 2022, who of course benefited from Max Verstappen taking his penalty. Ended up, though, only finishing in third, did Carlos that day. Ferrari have taken pole at Spa twice since 2015. Pretty poor record, given how competitive they've been in the last 10 years in general around tracks like this. Ferrari still, though, have not qualified inside the top 3 of the grid since Monaco, so still struggling a lot in qualifying. For Mercedes, again, very curious to see if this technical directive has affected them or if it's some other issue, but at the minute, they are on the back foot and they are definitely struggling. So we'll see how they do compared to Ferrari. If it does rain in Q3, then maybe they can get ahead of Ferrari and still get a pretty good grid position. But yeah, in the dry, that's where I'm most interested to see what their pace is like, because so far, it really does not look good for the Silver Arrows. But if it is dry in qualifying, I still think they can mix it with Ferrari. I don't think Ferrari are going to out-qualify them with both cars necessarily, but Ferrari are more so favourites to finish ahead in that little battle. And let's go on to some stats quickly with Mercedes-Benz. Their last pole position at Spa was with Lewis Hamilton in 2020. Of course, ended up with a 1-2 in qualifying and the race that weekend. Mercedes have taken pole at Spa 5 times since 2015. And Mercedes also have not qualified inside the top 2 of the grid at Spa since 2020. Not been a great last couple of years for them at this track. McLaren, though, looking great for them. Obviously, with Max's penalty, they just need to make sure they beat the rest with both cars. And they've got the front row locked out. And looking at the race pace that they've got compared to Ferrari and Mercedes, you could say that this weekend's race may be already bought and paid for. Of course, long way to go. You never know what is going to happen at Spa. We've seen crazy things here. We've seen drivers win from 16th on the grid here at Spa, so you never know what could happen. But yeah, McLaren looking great. Car looks great through all parts of the track, especially the middle sector, which is the most important sector on the track. As long as they are easily beating everyone through there, then I don't think they need to worry really at all in qualifying tomorrow, whether it's dry or wet. But yeah, McLaren looking great. Most interesting will be the battle between the two drivers who look very close to one another. And with McLaren, their last pole position at Spa was with Jenson Button in 2012. What a weekend it was for Jenson. Dominated qualifying and dominated the race as well. Won by, I think, 20 seconds over a pit stop ahead of the next best car being, I think, Sebastian Vettel that day. McLaren also haven't had a front row start at Spa since 2012. So it has not been the greatest Grand Prix for them in recent history. I know Piastri, I think, had a good sprint race last year here in the wet, but, you know, other than that, it's not been great, this Grand Prix, for the McLaren team. Aston Martin, they look competitive in terms of, you know, the fight to get in the top 10, but I wouldn't say they're the most competitive midfield team. I think Haas probably take that title. But Aston Martin, yeah, not looking too great. Middle sector pace looks good compared to the rest of the midfield, which is, you know, something that is, I guess, a good omen for them if it does rain, that they've got good cornering performance. But it's just depressing talking about this team because we know how much more they're capable of. Yet we're talking about them, you know, can they get a car in the top 10? How ridiculous is that? But yeah, that's the reality for them. Be interesting to see also with Aston Martin which driver ends up ahead, because Lance Stroll has been pretty good performance-wise compared to Fernando Alonso recently, no matter why Alonso has dropped off in, you know, his level. Racing Bulls, of course, Yuki Tsunoda has a grid penalty and will start guaranteed from the back of the grid. So maybe Tsunoda will help his teammate out, you know, in terms of a tow down the straights to try and maybe put Ricciardo in a decent position. But at the moment, looks like they've got a bit of a setup issue with the car at the moment. Probably a bit too much, what do you call it? Or not enough, rather, downforce on the car. Really costing them in the middle sector. But a decent or a good top speed, you'd have to say, so far, which is encouraging and very much will help them in the race. But yeah, they still will want to improve that middle sector speed, because again, the middle sector here at Spa, but not only because of how many corners there are, but just how long it is so crucial. Alpine surprisingly looking good, maybe because of the upgrades, we don't know. But yeah, Esteban Ocon up in the top 10. Good livery as well, the Deadpool and Wolverine livery, I like it. That they're doing for this weekend. Of course, Ryan Reynolds, he owns, I think, a share in the team now, as Alpine desperate for investment, because obviously Renault pulling away. But yeah, Ocon looking good. Gasly probably could improve a bit. But good to see that Alpine are showing a bit more pace, because they've been a bit missing in the last 2 or 3 races after looking good back in Spain and Austria. Yeah, since then they've just dropped off a bit. So good to see them returning. Williams, surprisingly slow. Alex Albon, though, we know, will just magically be able to end up in a great qualifying position. Somehow will drag his way into the top 10, or will only just miss out on the top 10, something like that. He's always in there somewhere in that fight. So we will see him there again. Be interesting to see, though, if Logan Sargent can keep up like he has so far with Albon, as Sargent not that far off on lap time so far. Sauber, looking okay, but I'm not expecting them to be in the top 10. They don't have as quick of a car, I don't think, as Haas, Aston Martin, probably Alpine either. So yeah, Sauber, unless one of their drivers pulls out a worldie of a qualifying lap, I don't see them in the top 10. And finally for Haas, looking good for a dry qualifying. Bit concerned though in the wet whether they'll be able to get through. I mean, Nico Hülkenberg, we know, very good wet weather driver, but I just think the car might not be as suited to the wet conditions if it does rain. But in the dry, I'm very confident about this car. It's a good car for this track, and it is one of the best midfield cars right now. So if it's dry, Haas should be fine, but if the rain starts to fall, might be some issues for them. But again, reminder, this is my prediction for the top 10 in qualifying. Max Verstappen, I think, will finish first. Of course, we'll have to take a 10-place penalty. And then it'll be Piastri second, Norris third, Leclerc fourth, Russell fifth, Sainz sixth, Hamilton seventh, Perez eighth, Hülkenberg ninth, Ocon 10th. And then probably one of the Aston Martins will start in 10th because of Verstappen's penalty. So that's my prediction, guys, for qualifying tomorrow. And let me just finish up quickly the poll in the chat where I asked you guys a bit earlier who would start this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix on pole position other than Max Verstappen, because of course Max is not able to. I'll just wait for the results to pop up, as they should in a moment, not quite at the minute. There you go, 58 votes on that poll, and 55% of the vote has gone to Lando Norris, 22% to Lewis Hamilton, 17% to Oscar Piastri, and then 5% for Charles Leclerc. Thank you guys for voting, and thank you guys for coming along for this qualifying preview. Again, reminder, I will not be live tomorrow for qualifying, but I will be on stream on Sunday, live at 12 p.m. UK time, 2 hours before the race, obviously for the race build-up, then the race watch along for the Belgian Grand Prix, along with my co-commentator Niblo. And then, the day after the Belgian Grand Prix, there will be a podcast episode talking about what happened at Spa, also probably getting into a couple other bits of news, such as Binotto being Audi for the future. And then, after that, I will be doing another podcast episode where we'll be doing our mid-season review, which of course is something that a lot of people do, and I can't wait to do, because especially with the driver rankings, I'm looking forward to ranking the drivers from 21st all the way to first. But thank you guys for coming along. As I've said, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more content like this. Make sure to smash the like button before you go. It does, of course, help the channel grow. Make sure as well to come along to that stream on Sunday. Would be great to have you along for the race, obviously to enjoy the race together. Or if you are unable to watch the race, you can easily keep up with what's going on with us here on the channel. But also make sure to join the Discord server. Link in the description and in the chat as well, I believe. But guys, until my next stream on Sunday covering the Belgian Grand Prix, we'll see what the grid is after tomorrow, and hopefully we've got a great grid for that Belgian Grand Prix stream on Sunday. And until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.